Okay, so what we have here is a ring that I had to reverse engineer, or we had an earring. So right here is the setting itself.
So
Let me
what we have here is a ring that I had to reverse engineer, or
and we can hide that as well. What I'm going to turn on now is the original scan. So remember, I showed the image of this before. This was just a scan that I did. I filled in everything with white wax just to, I didn't want to, I had to redo the layout, and it wasn't necessary to worry about azures or diamond holes at this point. But what I really wanted to do was capture the design intent of this piece. So what I'm going to show you now is just how to extract some information off this, extract some data. So here we are. I just shaded this in a little bit. I'm going to lock it in place. And I'm going to go in here and I'm going to pick a tool for myself. I'm going to pick the interpolated curve. And in Rhino, if I have the vertex snap on, that's going to allow me to go right on this mesh and snap onto the mesh itself and start to capture information off of this. And again, I'm going to do this down and dirty. This is not, a Rhino class. It's just a demo to show how quickly you can go in here and create some curves and create a base surface for yourself to start to model. So there's my first curve. It's on the edge of that object. I'll go on the inside now, and we'll do the same thing. Now, in the meantime, I'll go in and just edit that a little bit. I'll pull that control point out slightly. And I'll probably even bring this down a little bit. We'll leave that as it is. All right, so here we go. We'll move this back slightly. And I'll just go back in now and I'll rebuild these curves just to give myself something that's a little more manageable. And right now I'll go in and I'll loft this together. And there's my first surface created off that object. So that's what I started with. And this is, I'll pull this surface out here. Just about one here. And I'll untrim this so you can get an understanding of what we started with and what we ended with. So that surface was turned into this surface, which gave me the basis for my ring. Everything else was control point modeled in as far as the edges and getting it squared off. But it was a very simple process to do this, to capture that information. So that's one way of capturing it in Rhino. Alternatively, you can also use the section tool in Rhino in order to do this as well, to capture information. So I'm going to unlock this. And if we go to the section tool in Rhino, we'll highlight this, and I can go in now, and just by coming across here, I can start extracting cross sections off my part, or whatever information, how you want to get your information is really up to you, but this is another alternative way of creating some information cross sections. So obviously, these are polylines. Remember that we're projecting onto a mesh surface. So you have, these are degree 1 curves with just a very large amount of points on here. So at this point, I would, this would be turned into a degree 3 curve, which then you can use to effectively rebuild something.
Great way to get cross sections.
Yeah, yeah. So that's one example. Now let's go into another. Let me move this over, and we'll take another example for you. Any questions at this point? Does anyone have?
We did have one about the best way to close pockets in ZBrush, which I said maybe we touch on that a little bit later when you get into ZBrush.
Yeah, well, I mean, any of these things, it's really understanding the software that you're using. So, I mean, there's a number of tools in ZBrush to do this. I mean, without getting into specifics, once you bring a mesh in, in your geometry tab, there's a whole bunch of stuff in there to help you close holes. Again, I'm using Dynamesh a lot because I find that it's. I tell people about Rhino. The good news about Rhino is you can do one thing 5 different ways, and the bad news about Rhino is you can do one thing 5 different ways. We have the same thing in ZBrush. There's a number of ways of creating meshes in there, or appending meshes. So it's really up to you. I find that bringing something in, doing some cleanup on it, and then converting it to a Dynamesh has been the workflow I've been using. But again, you can convert it any way you'd like. You can bring it back into a traditional, convert a traditional ZBrush mesh or native mesh, so to speak, and bring down the subdivision levels in order to sculpt a little faster and to get, again, you're trying to get, near net shape as quickly as possible, whatever, no matter what you're doing, whether it's in Rhino or ZBrush or any piece of software. The next thing I'd like to show you, and this was a ZBrush and Rhino workflow. So I showed you this before. This is the ring I did for Anthony Lent. This was the original scan. If you look at it, you can see where we had some ribbing on the shank, the wings, and the heart. So he wanted to update this. I'm going to close these out for now and just hide them. So what I did with this was, this is the scanned heart, by the way. That's the mesh for the scan right there. So at this point, I rebuilt the heart, and I actually made it a closed volume, so I was able to take it and position it. I rebuilt the shank right here. So the shank was just a basic shank. I put in some details with control point modeling and got my shank and my heart together. And then these are the original scans for the wings. So once I did that, now remember that the original, right what you're seeing here is these are built up a little more in ZBrush. So the original one was this heart, the shank, and these wings that was then exported and brought into ZBrush. So let me bring ZBrush across for you, and I can show you some of the results on this. So here's the heart imported into ZBrush, the heart ring. And again, this is further along in the process. The wings themselves have a little bit of sculpting done on them, but I'll bring the history back on this, or the timeline, and we'll see how this progressed. I'm running a little slower because of the connection here, so please be patient. But you can see the heart changing. You can see some sculpt marks in there, here and there, and I'll go in here and I'll actually pull some surfaces for you. So this is what we started with. And then this is what we ended up with. Okay. So once I got these in the position, I was able to combine these and then go in and do the blends between the heart and the wings. I added volume. At one point, we decided that we want to do a pave one, so we updated everything and I added volume to the wings. This is my center plug for the size that I created to bring in. And then these are the two finished objects. So on the left side, upper left, you can see the pave version. On the lower right, you can see the plain version. And again, we're able to go in there and now combine these, refine, work out radiuses and softening on intersections and things of that nature.
Looks great.
Okay. So I'm going to pull this off to the side, and I'm just going to open up another file in the meantime so you can take a look. And second here. The next thing I'm going to show you is a engagement ring project. And I do want to open another Rhino file we're talking here. I mean a ZBrush file. So just give me a second, everyone.
This was a project for a matching shadow band.
Okay, so yeah, this was sent to me by the customer. This is actually the customer that I just did the install for on Tuesday. So for them, they do a lot of matching bands, as a lot of people do in bridal. And their question was, can we use this for that? And the answer is yes. So once the ring is in and I've got it centered and where I think I want it to be, let's take this and shade that in. Now you notice I have a circle here. So that circle I put in place because I'm going to do a projection on this and project that curve onto that ring to give me my first initial curve. So I'll change my construction plane. I'll go to my project, pick that surface or that object, which is still a mesh. And now I just projected that curve on there. I'll deselect that. And of course it's project, so it's going through the whole object, and we'll delete that. Now I have here a curve which matches the band on the edge, and I can use that as a path. And I'll show you we also created some other geometry. Chris?
You could essentially take a customer's ring, do your scan, and hand it back to them, and you'll have all the data you need. You won't have any more of that going back and forth with the customer.
Correct, and the other thing is that, you know, a lot of customers are reluctant to leave their rings, which is understandable. They like to have it on their finger, and the thing about this is that I didn't have to capture the whole ring. I really only needed one face of this, so the scanning process can be even faster for this kind of work. So I'm going to just delete that. I have that done already. I'm going to open up this. So I have a number of curves here. Let me explain what these curves represent. I've taken these. I've also scaled them up a little bit, and I offset them. So I'm going to show you just a couple of ways of making a very, very quick ring. So what we can do here, I'll take these two curves. Well, the first thing I'd like to show you, let's take this one, and let's create a surface of this. So we'll take a 2-rail sweep. I already have a curve there, right there. And there I've just created the surface that now I can use to help me with my first match on this. There are multiple ways you can do this. This is just one way of doing it. So that's one method.
That's the fun part right there, figuring out the best strategy.
Exactly. And again, model building is about strategy and what you want to do with the information at some later date. So that's one way of doing this. So I'll just get rid of that. Another way I did this was I took and I used two paths, this one and this one, or two rails, and I will go in here now and just grab these cross sections, which is another way of doing this. And we want to close sweep, say OK. I generally rebuild things right away on something like this. And so I can go and rebuild that. At this point, I would probably use some control point modeling and move things around to make it a little smoother, square things off. I generally overbuild my ring so I can trim it out on the inside as well. So there's my buck that I'm working against. And it just gives me a way of understanding where the geometry is going to go. Alternatively, again, you can take something like this. I extruded this at one point to a width that I wanted to. And I created a surface here, and then with some control point modeling, and so we'll turn these on. I'll grab these control points here. Oops, I don't want that. There we go. And we could just drag these in. And, you know, so
they actually ended up printing this. They 3D printed it, and it fit perfect.
Right. So, you know, and there's again, there's a few other ways you can do this. This is really up to you. Once you get the scan in, it's about model strategy and modeling strategy. Again, we can use a section tool on this if necessary. The only downside about the section tool is that it's going to go across the whole model. Oops, not wrong one. So as I put one across here, again, it's going to go to the opposite side. One way you can also work with this is to just put mesh planes in there where you need them and capture information that way with a mesh intersection. So there is a number of ways of capturing the information here, but it's all very, very usable, and it's very, very fast. I'm going to go back into ZBrush again and show you the lion's head ring and just the idea of directly sculpting on something.
So really, at the end of the day, you got to look at what is it that you're looking to do. Are you going to use that scan as a almost like a guide to reverse engineer, or do you want to actually do what Dominic's doing here and use it to redesign that actual piece?
Right. So this, I'm sorry about this. The resolution is a little off the way it came in, but you can see where that was the original scan on the left side. And again, this is just for demonstration purposes, but I was able to take this ring and make changes on it, resculpt the mane, add some volume to the shoulders. So this is a direct modeling of the meshes as opposed to just extracting information off of them and using it in that manner. And while we're opening up I'm going to open up another file here, and then I'll go back to Rhino for you. Okay.
I haven't seen any questions for a little while, so we must be doing okay.
All right. Okay. And I guess the last one I'll show you just very, very quickly is this is a skull ring. I'll show this to you while we're waiting for the ZBrush one to open up, and that would be the final one that we'll show. And that's the face, show the original face scan. Now, Rhino's not a mesh modeler, but there are tools in there that allow you to take meshes and use them effectively. And this is one of those cases where I cannot do direct modeling on it, and but there are plenty of other programs that can. Couple more minutes here, I guess. Couple more seconds.
Only as fast as your computer.
Yeah, well, you know what it is. It's I think that's what's happening is because of the connection. Whenever I'm connected on GoToMeeting, it slows down a little bit. But we're almost there, guys.
I did get one question here. So Dominic prefers ZBrush over other programs out there because he can directly manipulate scanned meshes. He can answer that for himself. There's a lot of programs, though, that have that capability.
Right, right. Unfortunately, you're only as good as your skill sets when it comes to software, or your skill sets are married to software nowadays. And, what you pick as far as a modeler is really up to you, but my take on it is I want to take something, I want to work in a way that I know I can get help on something. So something that's a little more, out there in terms of what it can do, that's fine, but I want to be able to get help whenever I need it. So to me, you can throw a rock on 5th Avenue and 47th Street these days and hit somebody in the head who knows Rhino. And ZBrush, as we know, has such a user base. And so it's the workflow that I chose. But I've done this. I've been using ZBrush for a few years now. I actually bought it probably in 2006. In the past 2 or 3 years, I've been using it a lot more. Yeah, I mean, the direct modeling, you can use 3D Coat to do with this. You can use Modo, which I also use Modo on occasion. It's sub-D modeling, but they also have sculpting tools in there. So that's an environment where you do have the ability of using sub-D surfaces and sculpting at the same time in one software package. Now, I don't know if you're familiar with ZBrush. They've added the ZModeler, which is a set of tools that allow you to do, again, sub-D modeling and then convert it to a mesh for doing other things. The only thing, the reason my workflow is Rhino and ZBrush because I have to work accurately. I need to have things and I need to know. Rhino is really an engineering tool on some level and a modeling tool, and ZBrush is not an engineering tool in any way, shape, or form. There is a scale in there, but you're not going to be able to measure anything. There are no measuring tools per se when you're trying to look at things on, the 10th of a millimeter level. So, but I do set things up and I bring it in there, and it's a very effective tool either to do things directly or to bring them out of Rhino and then into ZBrush. So this ring is one of those examples. The ring on the right side, on the left side here, was the original scan, and that's the original. And we wanted it warts and all, as they say. So what I did with this was I took it and I broke it apart. I basically unwrapped it, flattened it out, and I was able to take this and remake rings that I was able to take into ZBrush and then add detail to it. So if you look at this, on this one, you can see a step in here, for instance. So then this is a single volume here, but when I brought it to ZBrush, I was able to take it in and then play around with those and, the things that were mismatched, blend them and make the ring look like it belonged in one piece rather than in sections. And the customer was extremely happy. So we went from 11 3/4 to a 10 1/2 and a 5 1/2 approximately.
So you basically used it as a ring resizer.
Yeah. With amazing power behind it, because it really made a huge difference. And the customer was very happy because he was able to sell this a number of times to people who really liked the ring. They liked the idea that it was old and beat up, and they wanted the same look.
Well, I think we've covered. I think we've pretty much covered what we would like to cover here. Any other questions you guys might have, feel free to send them over. Dominic, do you have anything you'd like to add here?
Sure. I mean, look, this is, when you look at these types of tools, my feeling about it is that everything has come together now in terms of price point and capability. When I first started doing this in 1992 and 93, what you could do with a laptop and Rhino for probably under $2,000 or like $2,500, in 1993 dollars was $70,000. And you're talking about alias, and you're talking about, a very expensive SGI workstation. So we've come a long way. Right now, between 3D printing and now scanning, we have the capability of really maximizing the digital tools and also maximizing information. And remember that everything we're creating here is data. And the data you create is something that's going to have longevity, and so try and make it as best as possible, and also leverage it differently. So what this has done for my business is allowed me to do jobs I could not do before, extend my range of capability, and even develop new talents for other things. And the scanning now, to me, is the final kind of keystone in that whole picture.
There was a question that's, what says here, the scanner works direct with the program. It works directly with EasyScan, the EasyScan program, and then from there you would save the file and export it to your CAD program. So hopefully that answers your question.
Right. Look, you do have to know a little bit about meshes and at least have an understanding of how to leverage them in other programs. So, it's prudent on the person who's looking at this to have an understanding of how to use these effectively. And, part of my business, in addition or beyond, the installations, is working with companies, helping them develop better CAD skills, best practices, but also, being able to give them an understanding of how to use these tools effectively to model anything they want and to tackle any job presented to them.
More question here, Dominic. It says here, are remeshing from the scan before going into ZBrush? No, you're basically doing that right in EasyScan.
Yes,
and
you can.
Yeah, you don't have to do it in ZBrush. You don't have to do it in ZBrush, I guess is really what it boils down to. You just do it in EasyScan.
Correct. Remember that this technology is what's called line of sight, as well as laser scanning is the same thing. So if there's a deep pocket or an undercut, if it can't see it, it's not going to capture the data. So, but once you capture it, you can process it through EasyScan. Again, you can fix holes, you can decimate things to make the files smaller. Obviously, some programs are going to have memory issues, and you want to make sure that the scans are able to be manipulated without slowing your system down. That's going to be a combination of the software and how it runs, and also your memory and your system. I think this one I have is 24 gig, so I don't have too many problems. Rhino will have a limitation on polys. ZBrush, there are very few I mean, I've seen 20 million polygon models in ZBrush. So, you know, it doesn't operate the same way or use the same graphics that Rhino uses.
We have another question here. What do you think the best way to keep a piece of jewelry in place while scanning on the scanner? And we talked briefly about that. There are some fixturing tools that will come with it to hold a ring in place. However, you, Dominic, do like to use putty, if I'm not mistaken. Explain exactly what you're doing.
Sure. Here's the reason why I do it. I mean, for me, the fixturing is nice, but if I have an expensive stone, I'm not going to clamp it in anything. So, as an example, I could put a piece of white layout wax. It's the wax that setters use for picking up stones. I take that, I warm it up in my hands. I make a little ball out of it, and I'll make a little extension, and I'll put that right on the table of the stone. And that way, two things happen right there. I'm not worried about the stone, being clamped together. And the other thing that happens is that the wax disappears. It doesn't show up in the scan, so editing is extremely easy. And that way I don't have to worry about trying to follow a line and, missing some polys and things like that. It's fast, it's down and dirty, and it's just the way I choose to do it. I will be upgrading my system, and having the new fixtures I'm certain will help me. But in this case,